Sponsored by Rabbi Shlomi and Mirla Greenwald. This is a Sicha from Likutei Sichos, Chelek Beis, Chag Pesach, and the topic of the Sicha is, in the famous teaching of Bechol Dor V'Dor, Chayev Adam Liris Es Atzmei, Ki Ilu Yotzim Mitzrayim, there is the version, the Girsa of the Mishnah, the Girsa of the Rambam, and the Girsa of the Alter Rebbe. And there are three parts in the Sikha. The Rebbe will, number one, ask 9 questions on the differences found in them, and also a couple of questions just on the specifics of what the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe write. And here you can see the breakdown. There are going to be 3 differences between the Mishnah and, on the other hand, the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe. There's one difference between the Rambam and the Mishnah. Then there's one question on what the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe write, one question just on what the Alter Rebbe writes, and then there are 3 differences between the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe. So we have, in terms of the differences, 3 differences between the Mishnah on one hand and the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe on the other hand. Then we see at the end there are 3 differences between the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe themselves. And then there is one difference between the Rambam and the Mishnah. Then there is a question on both the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe, and then a question just on the Alter Rebbe. Number 2, present a key to answering these questions. And number 3, answer the 9 questions. And just to point out over here at the beginning that this Sikha is quite a difficult Sikha, and some parts weren't 100% clear to me, so that may remain unclear at the end of the Sikha. Just wanted to acknowledge that as we go through the Sikha, there may be some parts that are not entirely clear. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Chametz or Matzah in his Sefer Hayad, Bechol Dor V'Dor Chayev Adam Laharis Es Atzmai Ki'ilu Hu Yotza Ato Mishibud Mitzrayim. That in every generation a person is obligated to show himself as if he himself just left the Shibud of Mitzrayim. And as the Maggid Mishnah points out, the source for this is the Mishnah in Pesachim. And there are 2 questions here. The first question is, we have to understand, because the Mishnah says lirais, and that's also the girsa that the Rambam has of the Mishnah, and the Mishnah does not say laharis. So what is the explanation for this, that the Mishnah says lirais, and the Rambam in his Sefer Halacha says laharis? And it's not just a difference in the wording, which itself is already a difficulty, but they also mean different things, because liris means that it's enough for a person to see himself as if he left Mitzrayim, whereas laharis means that a person also has to show it to another person. It's not enough that he just sees himself that way. And it's especially difficult since the words of the Rambam seem to be self-contradictory, because in the text of the Rambam's Haggadah, he writes liris just like it says in the Mishnah. So here we have within the Rambam itself that in his Haggadah he says liris, and then in his Sefer Halacha he says laharis. And the same difficulty is also on the Alter Rebbe, that in the text of his Haggadah and also in the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe writes liris, and in his Shulchan Aruch, his Sefer Halacha, he writes just like the Rambam writes in his Sefer Halacha, laharis. So we have this difficulty on the Rambam as well as on the Alter Rebbe. And the second question is another change in the wording of the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe from the wording in the Mishnah and what they themselves write in their Haggadah, is that in the Mishnah and in their Haggadah it says Ki'ilu hu yatsa mitzrayim, whereas in their Sefer Halacha, in their Sifrei Halacha, the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe write Ki'ilu hu ba'atzmai yatsa ato mishibud Mitzrayim. So adding the words ba'atzmai, Ki'ilu hu, he said they add ba'atzmai, and also they add ato, yatsa ato. So there, that just emphasizes the who. That who is it? Hu ba'atzmai, and it's ato right now. But the other difference, that in the Mishnah it says Ki'ilu hu yatsa mitzrayim, and they write mishibud Mitzrayim in their Sifrei Halacha, that's a difference of content, because mitzrayim means just from the land of Mitzrayim, whereas when you say mishibud Mitzrayim, that could be, and it was even outside of Mitzrayim itself, since Pare ruled way beyond Mitzrayim itself. And so that's a difference in content. Does a person have to see himself as if he left the land of Mitzrayim, or does he also have to see himself as if he left the Shibud of Mitzrayim, which also existed outside of Mitzrayim itself? The Rambam over there in Hilchos Chametz Matzah in Sefer Hayad, he continues the halacha and concludes, Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, V'Isanu Haitzi Misham V'Gemer, and he took us out of there. Val Davar Zeh Tziva Kadosh Baruch Hu B'Torah, and on this matter Hashem commanded in the Torah, V'Zacharta Ki Eved Ha'isa, you should remember that you were a Eved, you were a slave. Kaleimar, what this means to say is, Ki Ilu Ata Ba'atzmacha Ha'isa Eved, as if you yourself were a slave, v'yatzasa l'cheres, and you went out to freedom, v'niftesa, and you were redeemed. And there are three questions over here. Number one, the proof in the Mishnah is from a different pasuk. The Mishnah over there says, "Shenamar v'yigata levincha b'yemahu lemar," that you should tell your son on that day, saying, "Ba'avor zeh asa Hashem li." Because of this, Hashem did for me when I left Mitzrayim. That's the proof that a person has to see himself in every generation as if he left Mitzrayim. So why does the Rambam bring a different proof? And although it's not in the Mishnah, in the Girsa of the Rambam, in the Girsa of the Rambam of the Mishnah, there's actually no pasuk brought for this, but we still have to understand why doesn't the Rambam bring the pasuk that is found in our Girsa and in other Girsais of the Mishnah, which is the pasuk of V'Igata Levincha. Why does he bring the pasuk V'Isanu Haitzi Misham? The second question is, why does the Rambam also bring the pasuk of Zacharta Ki Eved Ha'isa, and he's not satisfied, it's not sufficient to just bring the first pasuk of V'Isanu Haitzi Misham? Why is it necessary to also bring the second pasuk of Zacharta Ki Eved Ha'isa as well? And the third question is, the halacha of Bechol Dor V'Dor applies over here to the night of Pesach. What the Rambam brings over here in Sefer Hayad and Hilchos Chametz Matzah, he's talking about the obligations that are on the 15th of Nisan, on the night of Pesach, and like it continues later on, Lefichach, therefore, Kishasayid Adam B'Layla Zeh, because of this, when a person eats his meal on this night, the following are the halachas. And so, if that's the case, the question is, but the mitzvah of a Zacharta Ki Eved Ha'isa, where we learn from there, Kaleimar Ki Ilu Ata Ba'atzmacha Ha'isa Eved, that is if you yourself were a servant, V'yatza l'cheres v'niftesa, and you went to freedom and you were redeemed, it doesn't have a specific time. And like we find that the Torah many times says V'Zacharta Ki Eved Ha'isa, and it's used in the context as an explanation for various things, for Shmir Shabbos, for taking care of your slaves properly when you free them. So, how do we understand that here it's being used for a din that's specific to the night of Pesach, which is the chiyuv of laharis, that a person has to show another as if he himself left Mitzrayim? The Alter Rebbe brings this teaching of the Rambam in his Shulchan Aruch, and like it's pointed out on the slide over there, that this teaching is taken from the Rambam. However, there are differences in the way the Alter Rebbe presents this halacha. After the Alter Rebbe brings the general teaching of Bechol Dor V'Dor, Chayev Adam Laharis Es Atzme Ki'iluhu Ata Yetze Mishimid Mitzrayim, he then continues and says, Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Ba'avor zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeisi mitzrayim, like it says that because of this Hashem did for me when I left Mitzrayim. So we see that it's in every generation. And then he continues, Val davar zeh tziva Kadosh Baruch Hu, and regarding this matter Hashem commanded, V'zacharta ki eved ha'isa b'Mitzrayim, that you should remember that you were a slave in Mitzrayim. Kaleimar, meaning to say, Ki ilu ata ba'atzmacha ha'isa b'Mitzrayim eved, as if you yourself were a slave in Mitzrayim, v'nifdesa, and you were redeemed, v'yatzasa l'cheres, and you went free. And there are four questions over here. Number one, why does the Alter Rebbe have a different source than the Rambam? The Rambam says that the source is from V'Isanu Haitzi Misham, and the Alter Rebbe says that the source is from Ba'avor Zeh. Now, we know that the understanding for the opinion of the Alter Rebbe makes sense to us, because that's the girsa of the Mishnah that he has, that the pasuk is, like we said in most girsais, that it does bring a source for the teaching, and it's from V'Yikata Levincha Bayimahu Leimer, and the Rambam doesn't have it in his girsa of the Mishnah. However, that itself requires an explanation. Why do they have a difference regarding the girsa, that as a result there is now this difference in the halacha that they bring? The second question is, why doesn't the Alter Rebbe start with the words V'Yigadta Levincha Bayema Ulemer? He says Shenamar, like it says in the pasuk, and then he just jumps straight to the words Ba'avor Zeh Asa Hashem Li. Why doesn't he start with the first words in the pasuk, like the Mishnah does, where it says V'Yigadta Levincha Bayema Ulemer? They should tell your son on that day, say the following. And we can't say that the Alter Rebbe is not bringing a proof over here for the mitzvah of Laharis, but rather he's only bringing a proof over here for the reality, the fact that Yetzias Mitzrayim exists in every generation. So he brings not V'Yikadta Levincha, which is the mitzvah of Laharis, but rather the pasuk, the part of the pasuk where it says Ba'avor Zeh Asa Hashem Li B'Tzeisi Mimitzrayim, because the difficulty with that is twofold. Number one, why indeed doesn't he bring a proof for the mitzvah of Laharis? And number two, if that's the case, then he shouldn't have quoted the words Ba'avor Zeh either. He should have went straight to the words Asa Hashem Li B'Tzeisi Mimitzrayim. Hashem did for me when I left Mitzrayim. So we see that reality of Yetzias Mitzrayim is in every generation. The third question is, when we look at the Alter Rebbe, we see that the Alter Rebbe adds a word that's not in the Rambam, and he adds it twice. First, in the pasuk V'Zacharta Ki Eved Isa, he adds B'Mitzrayim, and also when he describes what it means, he says Kalemer Ki'ilu Ata Ba'atzmecha Isa B'Mitzrayim Eved. So he emphasizes that a person has to see himself as if he was a slave in Mitzrayim, and he left the slavery of Mitzrayim. And since every word in the Alter Rebbe is precise and exact, so that means that the Alter Rebbe is teaching us that a person has to see himself as if he left the specific slavery that existed in Mitzrayim, not just a general slavery. And we can say that it actually is required li'ikuva, meaning that if a person doesn't have this specific experience, then he did not fulfill his mitzvah. And the question is, what's the Alter Rebbe's source to add the word b'Mitzrayim? And the fourth question is, why does the Alter Rebbe change from what the Rambam writes, V'yatzasa l'cheirus v'niftesa, that you went free and you were redeemed? Why does the Alter Rebbe change and put v'niftesa first? He says v'niftesa and you were redeemed, v'yatzasa l'cheirus and you went free. Why does he switch it around? Here we can see a chart where we have the teaching in the Mishnah, the teaching in the Rambam, and the teaching in the Alter Rebbe. And you can also notice the differences right away in the first paragraph where it says the actual halacha itself without the sources. We see that the Mishnah says Bechol Dor V'Dor Chayav Adam Lirois Es Atzmai, whereas the Rambam and Alter Rebbe say Bechol Dor V'Dor Chayav Adam Laharis Es Atzmai. Also, when we look at the continuation, the Mishnah says Ki'ilu Hu Yotza Mimitzrayim, whereas the Rambam and Alter Rebbe, besides some other very tiny and potentially not such important differences, or not significant and meaningful differences, they say Ki'ilu Yotza not Mimitzrayim, but rather Mishibud Mitzrayim. Then we move on to the next section, where you have the proof Shenamar. The Mishnah brings the pasuk V'Yigadta Levincha Bayema Ulemer Ba'avor Zeh Asa Hashem Li B'Tzeisi Mimitzrayim, whereas the Rambam brings a different pasuk. And the Alter Rebbe, although he brings the same pasuk, but he doesn't have the first four words of the pasuk. Then we move on in the Rambam and Alter Rebbe. They bring another teaching, Valdavar Zeh Tziva. There's another Tziva, there's another command from Hashem. And then when we look between the Rambam and Alter Rebbe themselves, the Alter Rebbe brings the word b'Mitzrayim, Eved Isa, b'Mitzrayim, Eved. And then at the very end, we see how they switch around the order of the Yitzasa, the Cheres V'Niftesa, that the Rambam has it in one order, and the Alter Rebbe switches it to a different order. And in that, we could look at the 9 questions and see almost all those questions in what we just looked at over here in the chart and pointed out. Now we're going to move on to the answer. And here in the answer, that's where there are a number of parts that are not clear to me, and that may come across in the explanation. And because it's a very long answer, there's going to be titles before each part. So the first part is the explanation. All of this is as follows. In the Din of the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe of Bechol Dor V'Dor, Chayav Adam Laharis as Atzmai, Ki'ilu Ba'atzmai Yotza Atam Meshibin Mitzrayim, there are four aspects. There are four parts. There is number one, the Metzius, the reality. What is the reality? That is that the Geula of Yetzias Mitzrayim is a Pu'ula Nimshachas. It's an ongoing thing. Because otherwise, if Hashem did not take our fathers, our forefathers, out of Mitzrayim, then we would still be slaves. Like it says, Ilu lohoitze HaKadosh Baruch Hu Avaseinu Mitzrayim, Harei Anu, Uvanenu, Uvnei Vanenu, Mishuvadim Hainu L'Pari B'Mitzrayim. So that's one part, the Metzius. And then there is the Chiyuv, and within the Chiyuv there are three parts. Number one, the Chiyuv, the main Chiyuv, and that is for a person not just to mention it as he does twice a day, but rather also to lirais, to see himself that Ki'ilu hu ba'atzma yotza atam mishibin Mitzrayim. A person has to see himself as if he just left the slavery of Mitzrayim, and that's how he has to feel. He has to feel that he just left the shibud of Mitzrayim. And then there is the chiyuv of laharis. And that means that it's not enough that a person should see himself this way, that he just left Mitzrayim, to feel that he just left Mitzrayim. But he also has to show it to another person. He should show this feeling to another person. And then number four, there's the chiyuv of laharis, that it's not just by saying the Haggadah, which is also to another. He's saying it to another person, so that's laharis within saying the Haggadah, but that's not enough. It also has to be in every action of this night of Pesach. Like it says, a person has to be lechol, velishtais, and it has to be derech cheres, and it has to be bechol, maise, lailazeh, in every action of this night. So those are the four parts. There's the Metzius, and then there's the chiyuv of lirais, to feel it himself, laharis, to show it to another within saying the Haggadah, and then laharis, when it comes to every action of the night of Pesach. According to this, it's understood why the Rambam and Alter Rebbe also bring the pasuk v'zacharta ki'eved Isa, and they don't suffice with the proof that the Rambam brings from Vayisanu Hoitzi Misham, or the proof that the Alter Rebbe brings from Ba'avor Zeh Asa Hashem Li B'Tzeisi Mitzrayim, because those psukim of Vayisanu Hoitzi Misham and Ba'avor Zeh Asa Hashem Li B'Tzeisi Mitzrayim, they only refer to the Metzius, that the Gula of Yetzias Mitzrayim is a Pul Nimshachas, like it says, Vayisanu Hoitzi Misham Asa Hashem Li B'Tzeisi Mitzrayim. So it only refers to the Metzius, that the Geula of Yetzias Mitzrayim is a Pul Nimshachas, it's something continuous. But it doesn't refer to the Chiyuv on the person to see himself, Ki'ilu ba'atzma yotza atam meshibin Mitzrayim, that a person should see themselves as if they are now leaving Mitzrayim, or that they just left Mitzrayim. Because even if it's the Metzius, that it's ongoing and continuous, and the person himself is leaving Mitzrayim, but we can say that the Chiyuv has nothing to do with that. The Chiyuv is only to remember how it actually was for our forefathers. And even though it says, Asa Hashem Li and V'Isanu Hoitzi Misham, both of them are said in continuation to what to say to your son. It says, V'Gadta Levincha this, or V'Amarta Levincha this. But that's only what to say. Say to them that it's a Pul Nimshachas. But it's not saying what the person should feel, and definitely not what the person should feel in all areas of this night. So from those psukim alone, either V'Isanu Hoitzi Misham or Asa Hashem Li B'Tzeisi Mitzrayim, from those psukim alone, we only know that Yetzias Mitzrayim is a Pul Nimshachas. We don't know that there's a chiyuv for a person to feel it, and that's why the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe add that it was as if it was you yourself. So they're saying that the v'zacharta ki'eved Isa is not just to remember what happened to our fathers. It's not just to remember, but also al davar zeh, on the Vaisanu Heitzim Misham. Al Davar Zeh, this Vaisanu Heitzim Misham, and this also Hashem Li, that it's to me, on that itself, Hashem commanded V'Zacharta. You should remember it. You should feel it. So not just to remember what happened to your fathers, but remember Davar Zeh, that it's Haisanu Heitzim Misham. Remember that it's Asa Hashem Li, which means to remember it, to feel it. So that's why they bring the pasuk for the first chiyuv, liris, that it should be a feeling. And as we'll see, once we know that a person should remember, which means over here to see himself, from V'Zacharta Ki Aved, we see that a person has to feel it. So we learn that this chiyuv on the night of Pesach is not just liris, which we see from that clearly, but it's also laharis, to show it to another. And it's not just while saying the Agadah, but also while eating on this night and everything else. So we'll see how that goes, how we go from not just liris, but also laharis, and not just laharis in saying the Agadah, but laharis and everything on this night. But at this point, what we have over here is that the Metzias we learn from the initial pasuk, and then the chiyuv of liris, that we learn from V'Zacharta Ki Aved. Now we're going to explain how we get from liris to laharis, and that it should be laharis in every part of the night of Pesach. So among what's added in the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim on the night of Pesach, over the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim on every other day, is that on the night of Pesach, it has to be V'Gad Levincha, meaning that it's not enough for a person to mention it to themselves, but rather they must tell it over to someone else. And that's why when a person is alone, they need to ask and answer the question to themselves. Because this way, since one part of themselves is asking the question and another part of themselves is answering it, it's as if they're answering it to another. And since we find that in the detail of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim on the night of Pesach, that it has to be to another, so from there the Rambam and Alter Rebbe learn about everything else as well, including the detail of liris, that it has to be to another, and so it has to be laharis. So that's how we get from liris to laharis, because since we find that in Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim it has to be to another, from there the Rambam and Alter Rebbe learn about all other parts of Pesach that it has to be to another. So also the liris that we learned out from V'Zacharta Ki Aved, that liris is not enough that a person feels it themselves, but it also has to be laharis. They have to show it to another that this is what they feel. And it has to be in every action of this night. Now that one detail is not clear to me. How do we get to say that it has to be in every action of this night? We explained that we went from liris to laharis, but how do we get to say that the laharis has to be in every action of this night? So maybe the explanation is that the definition of liris, that a person feels it, is going to be that he feels it throughout every part of the Seder, because the Seder is connected to Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's what it's all about. And so the person will be feeling it in everything. And so when we say laharis, the laharis has to be in everything. At any rate, according to this, we'll understand the preciseness of the Lishonei Azov of the Alter Rebbe in writing Shenamar. What's the source of this? Ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeisim Mitzrayim. Even though, like we asked in the question, if it's to tell us about the Metzias, that Yetzias Mitzrayim is a pulin imshechas, it's ongoing, then he should only write Asa Hashem li b'tzeisim Mitzrayim. Hashem did it for me when I left Mitzrayim. So we see that the person themselves today is leaving Mitzrayim. It's a pulin imshechas. So if it's just for the Metzias, he should just write Asa Hashem li b'tzeisim Mitzrayim. And if it's for the chiyuv of laharis, then he should also write V'Gad Levincha, that you have to say it to another, laharis, to show it to another. Because with this, by writing Ba'avur Zeh, the Alter Rebbe emphasizes that the chiyuv of laharis to the pasuk of V'Gad Levincha is not related to the tzivui of V'Gad Levincha. It's not just connected to V'Gad Levincha, to saying over the story, but it's connected to the Ba'avur Zeh. Ba'avur Zeh means the time that we're in, when there's the matzah and maror in front of you, to the general time that all things have to be done in a way of it being to another. Not just the saying of the story. Everything has to be to another, and in all parts of the night. So that's the laharis. So that's why he brings from Ba'avur Zeh, that why he doesn't bring V'Gad Levincha to tell us it's not just confined to the saying of the story. And he doesn't say Asa Hashem li b'tzeisim Mitzrayim, which just talks about the Metzias. It's talking about the chiyuv, but he wants to show that the chiyuv is related to Ba'avur Zeh. It's related to the entire night, not just Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. The entire night has to be in a way of Asa Hashem Li, in a way that a person shows it to another. The entire night has to have the Laharis and not just the Sipur of Yitzias Mitzrayim. According to this, that the Chiyuv of Laharis is only on the night of Pesach, but the Chiyuv of the rest of the year is only Liris, so it's answered why in the Mishnah, as well as in the Haggadah of the Rambam and Alter Rebbe. In their own Haggadah, it only talks about Liris. The intent of this section of the Mishnah and in the Haggadah is a lead up to the next one, where both in the Mishnah and the Haggadahs of the Rambam and Alter Rebbe, it says right after Bechol Dor V'Dor, it says Lefichach anachnu chayavim l'haydis. Therefore, we have to praise Hashem on this night. So it's not coming to explain the chiyuvim of this night, but rather the greatness of Yitzias Mitzrayim. That Yitzias Mitzrayim is in every generation, and Yitzias Mitzrayim is on every day in every generation. And since Yitzias Mitzrayim is in every generation, and it's in every day of every generation, so that's why a person always has to be liris es atzmai ki'ilu yatzim mitzrayim, and that's why we have to praise Hashem. So it's not talking about the chiyuvim; it's talking about the greatness of Yitzias Mitzrayim. We have to praise Hashem for it, and because it's so great that it's in every generation and on every day, so therefore a person should be liris es atzmai ki'ilu yatzim mitzrayim. And regarding the question that the chiyuv of laharis is not mentioned in the Haggadah, why is that not mentioned? Fine, so it mentions liris over there and not laharis, because over there it's talking about the greatness of the day and that we have to praise Hashem. But why doesn't it also talk somewhere else in the Haggadah about laharis? So that is similar to the Haggadah not mentioning the chiyuv of the Dalet Kaisers, among other such examples. It doesn't mention other things that are happening on that night. And the reason is because we're actually doing those things. So it doesn't have to mention them. They're actually being done. And so to hear the saying of the Haggadah to another, when we're actually saying the Haggadah to another, is the very action of laharis. So it doesn't have to be mentioned in the Haggadah because we're doing it by saying the Haggadah to another person. However, it's still not understood. The source of the din of Bechol Dor V'Dor Chayev Adam Liris es Atzmei Ki'ilu Yatzim Mitzrayim is from the Mishnah. And since the Girsa on the Mishnah is Chayev Adam Liris es Atzmei and not Laharis, so where do the Rambam and Alter Rebbe know from the Shas? What's their source in Shas? That there's a Chiyuv of Laharis. And the explanation is, the Gemara there begins, right after the Mishnah, the Gemara there begins by saying, Amar Rava, Tzarech Shayemar, a person needs to say, Vayisanu Haitzi Misham. That's what he has to say. And the question is, what is he adding to what the Mishnah taught? And the answer is, that the wording Vayisanu indicates that when he's saying this, when he's saying Vayisanu Haitzi Misham, that there is someone else there. And that's what it means. What Rava is saying is, like the Rashbam indeed explains, that Vaisanu Haitzi Misham, Tzarech Sheyemer, Vaisanu Haitzi Misham means that Tzarech Laharis es Atzmei Kilu Yatzim Misham. He has to show himself as if he left from there. And this is actually brought down in the Rashbam as an explanation for what Rava is saying. And that's the source of the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe. And to explain this a little more, it's understood that the din of Rava, that Tzarech Sheyemer, Vaisanu Haitzi Misham, is not a detail in V'Igad Levincha. Because that's also there. You still get V'Igad Levincha when it's in the singular and a person says Va'oisi Haitzi. Also, if a person says Va'oisi Haitzi and he took me, he's saying it to someone else. So when Rava says Tzarech Sheyemer Va'isanu Haitzi Misham, he's introducing an entire new idea that the person has to laharis, he has to show himself as if he's leaving Mitzrayim. And from here, the Rambam and Alter Rebbe learn the chiyuv of laharis. And like we said before, that once we say laharis, it relates to all matters of the night of Pesach, that in every aspect of the night, a person has to show that he's feeling that he's leaving Mitzrayim. The explanation for why the Rambam and Alter Rebbe write Ki'ilu Yotza Mishibur Mitzrayim, even though the Mishnah says Ki'ilu Yotza Mitzrayim and not Shibur Mitzrayim, is that since they both learned that a person should feel as if they are now leaving Mitzrayim, that means that a moment before now, the person was in Mitzrayim. And so we can't say that it means literally Mitzrayim, since it's the opposite of reality. A person can't feel something which is the opposite of reality, whereas the feeling of being a slave is something a person could identify with. And it's especially a problem since it's actually forbidden for a Yid to return to Mitzrayim. And therefore we must say that when it says Kilu Yatzim min Mitzrayim, it means Mishibin Mitzrayim. And the Rebbe points out in the Aura that the Mishnah says min Mitzrayim and not Mishibin Mitzrayim is because the Mishnah is written in a shorter way. Like we know, the Mishnah is written Lashon Ktsara, but also the Mishnah's intent is that a person should see himself as if he left Shibud Mitzrayim. The reason for the differences between the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe, that the Rambam brings the pasuk of Vayisanu Haitzi and the Alter Rebbe brings the pasuk of Bavur Zeh. The Rambam writes Eved plainly, and the Alter Rebbe writes B'Mitzrayim Eved. The Rambam writes V'Yatzasa L'Cheres V'Nivdesa, and the Alter Rebbe writes V'Nivdesa V'Yatzasa L'Cheres. So it's all based and fits with the difference between them in the girsa of the Mishnah. The girsa of the Rambam is that the Mishnah doesn't bring a proof from Bechol Dor V'Dor Chayav Adam Chulu from the pasuk of Asa Hashem Li B'Tzeisim Mitzrayim. And we can say the reason is because the pasuk is literal, and it was said to the generation that left Mitzrayim that generation who actually left Mitzrayim, they should v'gat levincha, they should tell their sons, Ba'avurza Asa Hashem Li B'Tzeisim Mitzrayim. I left Mitzrayim. So this person is saying over what actually happened, but later generations that didn't leave Mitzrayim, it doesn't say anywhere over there that they should tell their sons, Asa Hashem Li B'Tzeisim Mitzrayim. And therefore, the Rambam brings a proof from the pasuk of Vayisanu Haitzi Misham, because it says in that pasuk clearly afterwards, Hashem took us out. Laman Havi Yisanu Lasas Lanu Eretz. Hashem took us out in order to bring us and give us this land. And most of those who entered the land weren't from those who left Mitzrayim. So that means those who didn't leave Mitzrayim are saying Vayisanu Haitzi Misham. So we see that every person has to feel and experience as if they left Mitzrayim, even if they didn't actually leave Mitzrayim in a physical way. So that's the Girsa of the Rambam. The Girsa of the Alter Rebbe is that the Mishnah brings a proof from the pasuk of V'Yigata Levincha. So it's clear that also from the pasuk of V'Yigata Levincha, where it says afterwards, Osa Hashem Li B'Tzeisim Mitzrayim, that there is a proof to say Bechol Dor V'Dor Chayav Adam, and therefore the Alter Rebbe brings this pasuk in his Shulchan Aruch, because that's his Girsa on the Mishnah. That means the way he's learning this pasuk of V'Yigata Levincha, that it's not just the generation that left Mitzrayim, it's also future generations, and all of them have to tell their sons, Asa Hashem Li B'Tzeisim Mitzrayim, that I left Mitzrayim. So we see from this pasuk that a person has to see himself as if he left Mitzrayim. And whether we learn the chiyuv of Bechol Dor V'Dor from Vayisanu Haitzi Misham as the Rambam does, or from Asa Hashem Li as the Alter Rebbe does, is Negei Al Adina. It affects the halacha, the din. From Vayisanu Haitzi Misham, we only know that the Haitzi Misham in general is also for future generations, but we don't know that it's in the same way that it was when Hashem took out our forefathers. And therefore the Rambam says, Eved plainly, since we only see from here that there is the idea of Haitzi Misham in general. But from Asa Hashem Li B'Tzeisim Mitzrayim, since it says Li and not Lanu, Asa Hashem Li, Hashem did it for me, not for us. So it's emphasizing that it's something that only the father who was in Mitzrayim can feel, and not the son. It doesn't say Lanu. But since it's also talking about future generations, as it says Bayemahu, V'Yigata Levincha Bayemahu, in later generations, it shows that it has to be the same for future generations the way it was the first time. So we have like this paradox in the pasuk. On one hand it says Li, me, and not you, not the son. That means it's something only the father feels. But on the other hand it's saying which father should say this? All fathers for all future generations. So what it's telling us is that on one hand it's like only the father and not the son, which would indicate that it's actually leaving Mitzrayim what the father did and not the son. And on the other hand it's saying all future generations should say this. And therefore the Alter Rebbe says, B'Mitzrayim Eved, since we see that it exists the same way for future generations as it was the first time, that there's a difference between the father and the son, and that it's connected specifically to Mitzrayim, and that's why the Rambam says as if you were an Eved, and the Alter Rebbe says that you were an Eved b'Mitzrayim Eved. You're an Eved in Mitzrayim. And now we'll also understand why the Rambam writes v'yatzasa l'cheres and then v'nifdesa, and the Alter Rebbe writes v'nifdesa and then v'yatzasa l'cheres. In Hilchos Shmita v'Yovel, the Rambam writes that Meresh Hashanah ad Yom Kippurim, on Yovel we know the slaves go free, so he says Meresh Hashanah ad Yom Kippurim, so loy hayu avodim niftarim lebateim v'le mishtabdim ladirneim. The slaves, they wouldn't go off to their homes, and they wouldn't either serve their masters. They would be sort of in a limbo. So they wouldn't be doing work, but they wouldn't either leave to their homes. Since Yom Kippur arrived, or once Yom Kippur arrived, the Beis Din would blow on a shofar, and the slaves would go home. They would go to their homes. And so we see that in leaving slavery there are two stages. There's leaving the shibud, and then there's the returning to one's place. And it's just that in Yovel, these two stages happen separately, and usually they happen at once. And therefore, the Rambam writes, v'yatzasa l'cheres, and then v'nifdesa. Because first there's going free from the shibud, and then there's v'nifdesa. V'nifdesa means like to be removed from the location and possession of the master. So first there's v'yatzasa l'cheres, as we explained, occurs in regular slavery, and then there is v'niftesa, that the person gets removed and they could go to their homes. However, among the differences of the slavery in Mitzrayim, and we said that according to Alter Rebbe, a person has to see as if he was a slave specifically in Mitzrayim. So among the differences of the slavery in Mitzrayim than what we find in other forms of slavery was that as long as a slave was in the land of Mitzrayim, he wasn't able to become free. And only when the slave escaped to Pi Achiras did the slave become free. And so therefore the steps to freedom were to first leave the location of his master, v'nivdesa, and only afterwards to go free from the shibud, from having to serve and work for the master. And so because, according to the Alter Rebbe, it's specifically the shibud of Mitzrayim that a person has to experience themselves leaving, so in that freedom, there's first v'nivdesa and then v'yatzasa l'cheres. But according to the Rambam, that it's not specifically the slavery of Mitzrayim, but slavery in general. So in general, by slavery, it's first v'yatzasa l'cheres, and then it's v'nifdesa. And the Rebbe concludes the Sicha with the words, V'hi rotzin, shebekarev mamash niska la'acheres de geula amitis v'ashlema al yedei Mashiach tzidkenu. May it be the will of Hashem that very soon we should merit the freedom of the geula amitis v'ashlema, the true and complete geula, through Mashiach tzidkenu.